Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here this evening for this community meeting on reducing secondhand smoke in Cupertino. My name is Astrid Robles, and I work in the city manager's office. And we have Leslie Zellers, our policy consultant, who will begin with our presentation shortly. We will have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation. To submit any questions, you can write it into the Q&A section below, raise your hand to speak, or if you're on the phone, dial *9. So now I will hand this off to Leslie Zellers, our policy consultant, to start the presentation. Go ahead, Leslie.
Thank you, Astrid. Good evening. I'm Leslie Zellers. I'm a policy consultant with the Tobacco-Free Communities Program in Santa Clara County. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the city is considering. We'll summarize what the policy options are, and then we'll be happy to take any questions or comments that you have at the end. So the focus is on reducing exposure to secondhand smoke. As many of you know, tobacco remains the #1 preventable cause of death and disease in California and the United States. In California, more than 40,000 Californians die from smoking each year. Santa Clara County is providing grant funding to cities that are interested in exploring smoke-free policies, and Cupertino received one of those grants to work on that. In particular, the city's focusing on exposure to secondhand smoke. That is the smoke that comes out of the cigarette or vaped product. It's not the smoke inhaled by the smoker. Secondhand smoke contains more than 7,000 chemicals, and there is a lot of evidence showing that it causes lung cancer, heart disease, and stroke. There's also particular harm to children who are exposed to secondhand smoke. We know that it causes SIDS, it triggers asthma attacks, and it leads to an increased rate of ear infections. The Centers for Disease Control and the US Surgeon General have documented that there's no safe level of exposure to secondhand smoke. And in California, it's classified as a toxic air contaminant. According to the CDC, the only way to fully protect non-smokers is to completely eliminate exposure to the smoke. This is a greater concern right now during COVID because many people are working from home. They're spending a greater amount of time in their home, and the health department is receiving more complaints from people who are exposed to secondhand smoke drifting in from their neighbors. We're also going to be talking about electronic smoking devices like e-cigarettes. The aerosol in e-cigarettes contains chemicals that cause cancer, and exposure to that aerosol does impact the respiratory and cardiovascular system. So for those reasons, the Surgeon General and others recommend regulating electronic smoking devices in the same way that traditional cigarettes are regulated. So for purposes of what the city is considering, when we talk about smoking, we're talking about cigarettes, cigars, cigarillos, hookah and pipes, any tobacco products that are smoked. We're also talking about electronic smoking devices known as e-cigarettes or vapes. And we're also talking about marijuana or cannabis that is smoked. We're not talking about edibles. So what the city's looking at, and these are the policies that we would like to get your input on, are requiring smoke-free multi-unit housing, and we'll tell you what we mean by that. smoke-free around building entrances, smoke-free public events, smoke-free service areas, which is where you line up to get a service, and smoke-free outdoor work sites. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of those policies. For purposes of our discussion, multi-unit housing means 2 or more units that have a shared wall or ceiling. So as you see in the picture, this can be things like a townhome, it's apartment complexes, it's condominiums, it's duplexes or triplexes. And in Cupertino, there are also some attached single family homes where they share a wall next to each other. So those would all be considered multi-unit housing. So we'd like to get a sense from you about where you live. If you're a Cupertino resident, we'd like you to fill out this poll about whether you live in an apartment, a duplex, triplex, if you live in a condominium, single family home, townhome, if you don't live in multi-unit housing, or if you own or manage multi-unit housing. So we can give folks a minute to fill out the poll. Based on our information, approximately 43% of Cupertino addresses are multi-unit housing. So these policies would affect a pretty big percentage of the Cupertino housing stock. All right, we'll go ahead and end the poll. So far, we just, as you can see from the results, looks like we might only have one participant at the moment, and that person lives in a home. So we definitely want your opinion too. So let me go on to the next issue. Some information about smoking in multi-unit housing. Based on a study that the county did, 1/3 of adults smelled smoke drifting into their home from another unit, whether they lived in an apartment or condominium. And we know that smoke can transfer in between units through ventilation, through cracks in the walls, plumbing fixtures, and of course, doorways and windows. Policies that protect public health by reducing exposure to secondhand smoke also reduce the risk of fire by prohibiting smoking, and reduce cleaning costs, for example, when you're turning over a unit. So what the city is looking at is prohibiting smoking in and around units. That would be within a radius of doorways, say 25 feet of doorways and windows. You wouldn't be able to smoke around a multi-unit housing, and actually inside of units. So there would be no smoking allowed inside of your apartment, including balconies and patios. There are 4 other cities in Santa Clara County, as well as the county itself, that have laws like this. The city's also looking at prohibiting smoking in common areas of multi-unit housing, which are things like walkways, the pools, the parking lots, any shared space that's outdoors or indoors. And there are 7 cities in Santa Clara County with laws like this. The city's looking at policies that are affect areas that are not just multi-unit housing. So you may know that there is already smoking prohibited in outdoor dining in Cupertino and within 25 feet from restaurants. So in the picture here, there wouldn't be smoking allowed in those areas in front of the Pete's Coffee. So what the city is looking at is broadening this policy so that all buildings would have a 25-foot smoke-free radius, or potentially 30 feet. So as you enter and exit a building, there would be a zone where smoking is prohibited, so people aren't standing right outside the doorway when you come out of a building. There are 9 laws like this in Santa Clara County, plus the county itself. The city's also looking at creating smoke-free public events. We don't have as many of these now, since people are home more, but things like farmers markets or any places where people would gather to see a shared event like a parade or a music event, that would be smoke-free. And there are 8 other laws in Santa Clara County like that. This is something we are seeing more of, people lining up to receive a service, whether it's going to the grocery store or waiting for the pharmacy, as well as there are potentially lines around ATMs or places like transit stops. So those would all be smoke-free areas under the proposals that the city's considering. And there are 4 cities in Santa Clara County with laws like this. The last area is smoke-free outdoor work sites. So right now, if you work in an office, or you did, but you have an office job or a restaurant, or you work in retail, all of those areas have smoke-free work sites. But outdoor work sites such as farm workers or construction or utilities are not currently protected from secondhand smoke exposure. So that's another area that the city is considering. We often receive questions about how laws like this would become enforced. So it would become part of the city law. So it would be against the city's law to smoke in these areas. And then for the multi-unit housing part, landlords would add this clause to the lease so that it would be a component of the lease. Tenants would agree to the pet policy, to not make loud noises, and they would agree that there's no smoking allowed in their unit or anywhere in the complex. There would be a phase-in period, so it wouldn't take effect right after the city adopts it. If the city votes to do this, there would be a number of months where the city would educate people and allow you to notify residents if you own or manage multi-unit housing. The enforcement itself would be complaint driven. There wouldn't be people going out proactively seeking violators for this. Education and warnings have been effective in many other cities for encouraging compliance with these kinds of laws. And the county would be providing signs for multi-unit housing and businesses to let people know that those areas are no smoking. So we're in a public input period here. There's, in case you aren't aware, there's a survey open through Open Town Hall. Here's the link. There is another community meeting that's scheduled for November 10th at 11 a.m. We're doing one in the evening and one during the day. So we invite people to attend that meeting. And for more information, including the link for the survey, you can visit cupertino.org/smoking. And there's also a place for you to sign up for email notifications if you want to receive updates about the city's progress on this law, or if you have any other comments that you want to submit. So that's all we have for our formal presentation, and we'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Leslie. So as Leslie mentioned, we are now at our Q&A section of the presentation. To submit any questions, you can write it into the Q&A section below. You can also raise your hand to speak, or if you're on the phone, you can dial *9. I will give our participants a few seconds to submit any questions that they may have. But we do have a question. Leslie, if you could tell us, what is the point of these policies, and why is the city doing this?
Well, the city is doing this in order to protect residents from exposure to secondhand smoke. There are a lot of complaints from people who are exposed to smoke in their home, and there's nothing that they can really do about it. There's nowhere that they can go. They may have children, they may have asthma, they may have some kind of lung condition. And so the point is, because there's no way for the air to be fully cleaned, the way to protect people from that exposure is to prohibit the smoking in those locations.
Wonderful. Thank you. We're still awaiting some questions from our participants. Another question is for everyone here. What are some other outreach that we are doing for this policy?
Well, as I mentioned, there are 2 community meetings. So we have this one, and the second meeting, we're also trying to aim particularly at owners and managers of multi-unit housing. We want to make sure that they're aware of these policies and have an opportunity to provide input. We'll also be presenting this information to the Chamber of Commerce. And there was a study session held with the Cupertino City Council, and there will be an opportunity, if the city considers these policies, there will be an opportunity for public comment at the City Council. So you could submit questions to them, and if you sign up for the email notification list, then you can be notified about the opportunity to visit the City Council. And of course, the survey is probably the easiest and most efficient way to provide your feedback.
Thank you, Leslie. I would also like to add that this information was published in the Cupertino Scene, which was mailed out to our residents, as well as a postcard, which was also mailed out. There's also been direct communication with some property owners and our farmers market owners for the public event policies that we were discussing. So there are many outreach opportunities here, and for questions, please submit your survey. Another question that we had is, do property owners or landlords need to do anything to implement these policies, or will the city handle this?
So specifically for multi-unit housing property, there are a few things that property owners and managers would be required to do. One is you would need to post signs at the property letting people know that it's no smoking. That's one of the most effective ways of reducing the smoking and exposure, so people know that it's a no smoking area. You would also need to change the lease to make sure that tenants have it as a part of their lease that smoking isn't allowed. And of course, just notify tenants that the policy is taking effect. And those are pretty much the responsibilities that would be on property owners or managers.
Great. Another question is, how will this be enforced?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get this a lot. So as I mentioned, it would be complaint driven. The goal is to encourage people to stop smoking. This is an opportunity. Many people who currently smoke would like to quit. And so there are resources available from the county to help people quit smoking. So information would be provided to people about cessation opportunities. And then also the first step would be education, just making sure people are aware of the law, that they know it exists, that they have an opportunity to comply. And then the landlords would be encouraged to enforce this in the same way they would any other lease term. So if you have a tenant who is violating the lease by having a pet or having loud parties, it's the same way you would enforce that. So we're really encouraging voluntary compliance. If necessary, the city could become involved and they could contact code enforcement to get some information or potential follow-up.
Wonderful. A few more questions here. Can I kick a tenant out for smoking on my property?
Well, technically you could. It is a lease violation. Again, we really don't want this to be a reason for people to be evicted. The idea is this is not a policy against smokers. It's a policy about where you're allowed to smoke. So people can still continue to smoke as long as they're in outdoor areas where smoking is allowed. And we would definitely encourage landlords to take other steps before they thought about doing something as drastic as eviction.
Great. And is marijuana included in this ordinance? And what about medical marijuana?
It is. So we talked about the definition of smoking, that includes basically any kind of product that's smoked. So cannabis for recreational use or for medicinal use, that is potentially harming other people who are exposed to it. What you would be allowed to do is consume edibles or anything that doesn't generate smokes, is just topicals or any other kinds of cannabis, other forms.
Great. And can I designate a smoking area in the back of my restaurant or job site or public event?
Well, smoking is allowed in any outdoor areas that are outside of the 25-foot zone. So you don't necessarily have to designate an area. If you have an apartment complex, there will be an option to create a smoking area as long as it's far enough away from the apartments. If it's a business, for example, there may be areas in the parking lot that are more than 25 feet away. People can go there to smoke without it being a designated area, or you could, indicate to folks that that's an area where they are allowed to smoke.
Excellent. Are there any more questions from our participants?
It looks like there's a question in the Q&A box. Is this going to expand to people smoking in their own backyard? So that was a question that the City Council asked us to just take a look at, whether they would like to prohibit smoking in backyards of single family homes. Right now, that's not a part of the study, but right now, smoking is permitted in the backyard, and smoking would be, even if the city looked at a policy like that, smoking would be permitted as long as you're more than 25 feet away from your neighbor's property or your neighbor's doorway.
Thank you, Leslie. Well, it looks like that may be our final question. Maybe we will wait a few seconds, but just a reminder for any resident with questions, all of the information can be found at cupertino.org/smoking. And all of the information of upcoming meetings and information will be posted there, as well as my email address, which is astridr@cupertino.org, which I'm glad to take any comments and feedback. So thank you everyone for participating in this webinar. Thank you, Leslie, our policy consultant, for your expertise. And thank you.